This is Candid Conversations with Dr. Mayfield, a podcast that resources parents, families, and friends with tools to have important conversations about mental and emotional health. This podcast is brought to you by Mayfield Counseling Centers, helping you find clarity, hope, and purpose.
Thank you for joining us again this morning. We are continuing a conversation with one of our friends and colleagues, Cassie Carrigan. If you didn't listen to last week's episode about her story of grief and losing Caleb and Radiance, I want to highly encourage that you go back and listen to that one first. Right. Today, we're going to dive into a little bit of what the process of grief has been for Cassie. And before we started recording, I was talking about this, the stories of surgeons who have to do an appendicitis on themselves or something, and how unique that experience is because they have the skills and the tools to be able to help others with that surgery. And now they're experiencing every small detail inside of themselves. And while we're counselors,
they shouldn't be doing surgery on themselves.
They shouldn't be doing it. I think that that's the wrong thing. But I think there are some aspects of that seem true here, where you have a lot of skills and abilities as a counselor, understanding of the process of grief and the being of human. And I'm curious if, last week we talked about that doesn't help
right
with the pain, but it does seem like this is a unique experience of how's it inform?
Yeah. How's it inform?
Yeah.
Has it informed your process or has it not?
Yeah. I think it is a very blanket statement informed my process in the sense that, I know grief is normal.
Right.
Sure.
Right. Sure.
And that it's okay to grieve.
Yeah.
And it's okay to take the time and the space to do that. Because, of course, I'm always telling my clients to do this and to take the space, to take the time. And, and I also know that is not an easy road.
No.
Mm-hmm.
We typically don't grieve because it's hard.
Right.
Yeah.
And we don't like uncomfortable feelings. One thing that has been difficult for me, I am pretty heady in nature. I am a thinker. That is my happy place.
Like to write and
yes. Yes. And most of the time with everything in my life, and I do think this is a good thing because I feel like I've gotten it to a place where it's healthy, I can almost think my way to what is true. And once I land on what's true, that automatically helps with my emotions, versus thinking about something or believing something that's not true. Then I'm going to have all these emotions that are almost wasted because I'm believing something that's not true.
Sure.
But then I have these emotions that I don't like to feel also.
Right.
So I've been able to do this, and it's worked really well for me. And one thing I know with grief, especially losing children, that is not possible.
No.
I cannot think my way
To truth.
to truth, because the only truth for me is that I have my children here.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm not in control of that.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I hate that I can't do that. But really, in the end, and I think this is true with grief, the only way through is to feel my way through.
Mm-hmm. Can you explain that a little bit more? Because I think that's a really profound statement.
Yeah. I mean, I think I have to I have to embrace my emotions and I have to be okay with that. I have to give myself grace in that. One of my typically my go-to is anger.
Sure.
That's just my personality.
Probably have a right for that one too. Yes.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Angry at God, angry at myself, angry at everybody else, right? And just, but I'm realizing, right, that it's like this attempt to make myself feel better, right? This expression of anger, which it really won't do, right?
Right.
Because
It's like a false justification.
yes,
Yeah.
And there just needs to be space to let myself feel all these emotions and not just let anger be the only one, because that's typically a secondary emotion, but let myself go deeper with this sadness, this deep longing for my my Caleb to be here, and Radiance, right? And what that means for our family, and to let myself like sit in some of these emotions that are just devastating in every sense of the word.
Totally.
You know, it's easier for me to be angry.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So when going through this process, like what has been the big thing that you've learned about yourself in this process?
Well, one thing I've learned, and I knew this before, but I'm a pretty strong, independent, I'm a fighter. I don't give up well. And so one thing I've learned that is how I'm going to grieve.
Okay.
It is this strong, intense feeling of grief. And so, which I don't like. I wish it wasn't so intense.
Right. Yeah.
You know, but I think I've realized that, of course, like that makes all the sense in the world once I say it like that. Like if I am this strong, you know, fairly intense person just in general, that like, of course my grief is going to look like that.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, and it feels like the loss of children, it feels like it just comes in and it blows up everything in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And my husband and I are constantly trying to like pick up all the pieces, but then we're like, we don't even know where the pieces go anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Or where they came from or any of that. Yeah.
Because there's no going back to normal.
No.
You had this, you know, if we look at it like a vase, you had this vase of what normal looked like. And that doesn't exist anymore. And there's no way to get back to that.
It's pulverized.
Right.
Like there's no vase.
Yeah.
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 That's a good analogy.
And so I think in that process of trying to figure out, okay, how do I do this, right? The best that I can.
Yeah.
You know, and I have to just believe, I have to make a choice to believe that there can still be hope, right? Otherwise, I don't survive, really.
Right. Sure.
Like that's just what it comes down to.
Totally.
And I don't want to survive. Yeah. And so I have to make a choice to believe that there is hope, even if I don't feel like that right now.
Or see it right now.
In this moment,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And for me, I mean, and for our family, the hope is in Jesus. Like that is, and that he will make this wrong stuff right one day. And that really is, you know, something I just have to keep going back to and reminding myself of truth in that. But yeah, just always trying to pick up the pieces and for our kids and, you know, just begging God to protect them from all of this trauma and, you know, watching my daughter grieve this, you know, I mean, she'll look at a baby and be like, I wonder if he's going to die. And I'm like, of course she does. Cause this has been her reality. Like she remembers our daughter, even though she never saw our daughter, but you know, our kids were around Caleb a decent amount, you know, and it's just, I mean, it's, I hate it more for them than I do for me, you know, just as a mom and my mama heart, you know.
Can you speak to the fallacy that's out there that grief process is the same for everybody? Like, I think when people come in to see us in counseling, they want us to give them a formula. They want us to give them the steps, you know, and I know as you I mean, and we've talked about this long before your story, just in supervision and in training and that kind of stuff that we tried to, and we think of it through as a process, but it's not. Like it's, your journey is uniquely geared towards your experience. And so there's not really a formula of grief, is there?
No. And, you know, I think it's like probably a lot of things we could say, right? Because everyone has a different personality, because everyone has different backgrounds, different experiences, you know, cultural pieces that play into that. Like grief is going to look different for everybody.
Yeah.
You know, and that kind of speaks to my strong personality.
Sure.
And now I'm grieving in a very strong, intense way. And, you know, there really just are no stages of grief, right? You don't accomplish one and then you move to the next one and accomplish that and then go on to the next one. You're kind of just all over the place.
Right.
And I mean, in one day you could experience everything.
Right.
And then the next day, nothing. And then, I mean, it is so up and down and you typically don't see it coming. Yeah. So I think that everybody grieves differently. And in my opinion, there is no wrong way to grieve. The only wrong way to grieve is to not grieve at all.
I agree.
You know? Yep. And so, I mean, that is what I tell my clients. That is what I tell myself, you know, is that the worst thing we can do, the only bad thing we can do is to not grieve and to try to push it out.
Which, I mean, as wise and as true as those words are, I think they equally suck.
Yes.
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 That sucks.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, we even talk about like good and bad emotions, but they're not good or bad. They're just easy and hard. And we try to avoid the hard feelings.
If
and
we can,
try to
at all
avoid
costs.
the hard things in life.
Right.
And so being told you're going through something that hurts more than you've experienced before, and the only way to do that healthily is to feel it.
Right.
Sucks.
And I'm gonna ask, if it's okay, ask a really
Yeah.
kind of personal question in this. And, you know, if you don't want to answer it, it's okay. But, you know, the DSM-5 has the lovely, you know, maladaptive grief, you know, or whatever that you know, diagnosis is of somebody that doesn't move through the state. I think it's an interesting diagnosis, to be honest. I think it's kind of silly, to be honest, because how do you measure that? What does that look like?
Right.
But as I've watched you and Jeff over the last 6 months, like I you know, as a counselor, I try to put myself in, you know, client's shoes, put myself in your shoes. I don't know if I could have done what you guys have been doing. And you know, you might look, you know, from the inside out, it doesn't look like you're doing it very well, but from the outside in, it's like, dang, like you guys are grieving better than I would ever imagine myself doing. You know, and I think it's that I would have seen myself probably in bed for 6 months and not wanting to get. So how have you, I mean, you said you're a fighter. I mean, that's probably part of it. But for those that are listening, like how have you taken that next step? Like, because I think that's probably the hardest part, right? Is taking that next step forward. Like, okay, I'm going to come back to work as a counselor.
Right.
Like, really?
Yeah.
You know, I'm going to go back to church, or I'm going to engage friends. And all of that, I can only imagine is equally as painful.
Totally.
Yeah.
So how have you been able to take those next steps instead of, like, nobody would have blamed you, to be honest, if you stayed in bed for the next, you know, or stayed at home or not done anything. So how have you re-engaged? And maybe you don't feel like you have, but.
Yeah. I know, I'm like sitting here hearing you say from the outside in, it looks like we're doing this well. You know, it doesn't feel like we are.
Sure.
But I think that's just because we still are just devastated.
Yeah.
In every sense of the word. The pain is so heavy. It's constant. I feel like I'm suffocating and drowning all the time, like a slow death every day. And then I wake up and then like my reality hits me every morning. I'm like, oh yeah, your children have died.
Yeah.
And, you know, not only that, but it was like 27 days of trauma,
Right.
like in a hospital, watching your child go through these awful things.
Yeah.
And you have no control. And, you know, but it's like, what else? Like, what else are we going to do? Like, we either make the choice to keep going.
Yeah.
And if we don't, then we're not going to keep going, you know?
Okay.
And that's very like high level, but we have these 2 kids at home. They definitely help because like we just have to get up and feed them. Like we have to take care of them.
You don't have the option.
Right. So there's this really practical piece in that.
Keeps you going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, you know, entering in with friends and sharing Caleb's story is healing for us, you know. So that has been, you know, probably why we have engaged with friends to some extent. Going back to church, right? Like, there, you know, me and God, we got a lot of things, you know, but, you know, in the end, I'm like, what other hope do I have, right? Where else do I go?
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. And so I go back because I really believe that to be true, even in the midst of my anger and my questions and my confusion, you know, and being honest with God about all of that. And again, I value honesty a lot. So if you ask me about this, you will probably get a very raw response because that is just who I am.
Yep.
I don't have the ability to not do that. And
that's what I like about you.
Yeah. And so, you know, but at times, you know, I've never felt like this before, but you know, I feel like I'm too much for people. And then I feel like I'm not enough for people because I don't have anything to give, right? It's just this weird space of my intensity, right? And every parent's worst nightmare is their child dying. And so, you know, we're having to live that reality, but then we step into a space and then it's like people see us as their worst nightmare. We're this like physical representation of their worst nightmare.
Yep.
And so trying to navigate that. And, again, it just feels like I said before, it comes in and just blows up every area. I feel incredibly insecure in relationships. And I haven't felt like that in 10, 15 years because I did a lot of freaking work to get to a secure place in my life.
Yeah.
And now it just feels like I'm like, where am I? It feels disorienting.
Yeah.
And I feel like I need people in a way that I haven't in years.
Sure.
And I don't think that's wrong. I don't think that's bad. It just feels weird and I don't necessarily like it,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, we need community. And, I don't know how you get through something like this without community.
Absolutely.
And as I'm reflecting on this too, I'm doing my own introspection of how we've engaged in the past few weeks and recognizing the times where I knew better and I could have initiated different conversations or whatever. And I know that there's a lot of other individuals who may have a friend who's grieving, and I want to encourage them that, the answer is just start.
Try.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure that, and I'd love for you to speak to this. I'm sure that if I start initiating out of a more appropriate or whatever kind of intentional way, that you're not going to be offended by that or whatever. And even so, like, I can't control your reaction, but I can control, I want to be here for you.
Right.
So I want to encourage our listeners, just try.
And it's interesting because reflecting on our conversations over the last couple of months too. I remember there's times when I come and ask you how you're doing, and we end up sitting and talking for a half hour,
right?
Because that's what you needed. And other times you're like, oh, we're okay this week, which maybe you weren't, but you're setting that boundary of going, thanks for asking, but I don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
And I think, but that the willingness to engage is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
And what are some last words that you can give our listeners, for, and again, I know we could talk about this for 15 episodes and still never come to a conclusion.
Totally.
So, I as best as you can, what would you say is good steps or good things that our listeners can implement?
Yeah. And I think it is just making an attempt, right?
Yeah.
The trying. And again, my go-to can be anger and wanting to blame other people, and I think I feel like I know too much. I know how the brain works.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's my brain's attempt of trying to make myself feel better by doing blaming,
X, Y,
anger,
and Z.
whatever it is.
Yeah,
totally.
And again, that is a dead end. That does not work.
Right.
And so I have really worked on trying to give people grace in this. And I can take myself back before all this happened, even as a counselor. I would maybe give myself a 6 out of 10 of how good I was at this, even as a therapist, because I can do it in my office, but in real life, it's different,
Well, and that's the benefit of the counselor.
Yes.
They're not in that experience.
Right, exactly.
Right.
Yeah. And so, giving people grace, but I think, again, just attempting to see them in their pain, right? As best as you can.
Yep.
You cannot fix it.
Nope.
They do not want you. They want you to fix it, but they know it's not possible.
Right, can't do that. Yeah.
Right, and to not put pressure on yourself in that. And if the person responds poorly, that's okay.
Yeah,
totally.
Right? And just love them in that, let them just do whatever they need to, but to not to say, in my opinion, to say nothing is worse.
Because it's not about the person that's not grieving.
Right.
We need to get out of our heads that it's about us.
Yes.
It's always about the other person.
Yes,
Yeah.
And let's
exactly.
leave it that way.
Yeah.
And not take things personally.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we get in a lot of trouble. Well, Cassie, I am honored that you joined us these last 2 episodes. Thank you for being vulnerable and sharing your story. And, I want to just encourage our listeners that if this episode needs to be heard by somebody, please share it. If you have questions for Cassie or for us, feel free to email us at candid@mayfieldcounseling.com and we'll get those to Cassie. But also, Cassie, would you just put a plug in for your website and kind of what you do on the site as well?
Yeah. So, of course, I'm a therapist here at Mayfield, but we'll put a link to my website on this podcast. But I love to teach and speak, and that's what I did before I got into this. And so I really we'll do that in any type of space, whether it's faith-based or not. And I can talk about anything from clearly grief, but, anything from like self-care, depression, anxiety, what our thought life is and what we believe and how it affects us, codependency. I mean, the list could go on and on and on. And so I love getting to do that. I am all about finding freedom and healing. And I think those things are possible for all of us, and I'm having to really remind myself of that in this stage of life. And so, the link will be on there. So feel free to reach out or contact me.
Thanks, Cassie.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us on Candid Conversations. We are so glad that you are here today, and we hope that if something came up for you that piqued your interest or that you have more questions about, you feel the freedom to call Mayfield Counseling Centers. We're not just here for people in Colorado Springs. We want to help everybody we can. So if you have any questions, email us at candid@mayfieldcounseling.com, or you can check out our website, YouTube channel, or Facebook page, where we post resources on a pretty consistent basis. We'd love to help you in whatever we can. Feel free to reach out.